Dan Drake, and this is Front Up on Visitor Network TV. Our guest today is Beaugrand, the chairman of the Community Preservation Committee. Ken, welcome. Before we start, I want to just call the audience's attention, if they haven't noticed, to the new set that we have here, which is a great improvement. It brings the place into the 21st century. The table is gorgeous, and I must say that Nantucket Glass did a super job on the tabletop.
It certainly looks fantastic.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you for allowing me to do that, and thank you for being here on a beautiful Sunday afternoon.
Right.
CPC. Let's before we get into the current controversy, which I know you don't want to talk about, let's sort of talk about the background and the mission and so forth, because I think people really don't always understand what it's all about. And so perhaps you could just talk about how long it's been around and what it really is supposed to be doing.
Yeah, the CPC started about 13 years ago. We were one of the very first communities to participate in the Community Preservation Act. And what it does is it puts a surtax of 3% on our real estate tax, and that money then becomes allocated to the CPC, and their charter is to take a look at the needs of the community in three areas: historic preservation, open space, and affordable housing. And what we have to do is each year we're mandated to allocate 10% into each of the three categories, and then the balance is to be allocated into the categories that the community has the most critical needs at that particular point in time.
In the committee's judgment.
In the committee's judgment.
Right.
And what we then do is we make recommendations to town meeting, and then town meeting reviews the recommendations after FinCom has reviewed them, and they get approved or changed. What was really important is that because we were one of the very first communities to participate, the Act provides for state match. And so in the early years, we had 100% match from the state for everything that we raised through our local assessment. So over the 13 years, and I've been on the committee since the very beginning, over the 13 years, we've allocated close to $30 million, and somewhere between $13 to $14 million has come from the state. So the community has had the ability to utilize those funds, which we otherwise not would have had the opportunity to do.
So the share we get from the state goes down as other communities opt in?
Yeah, and right now, this past year, the share from the state was down to 26%. But the Community Preservation Coalition has gotten the legislature to add some additional monies into the coffers, because the state's match comes from real estate transactions, and with the real estate market being very slow, the funds were not as available. And so last year there was an additional money that came in, and we had about 33 or 34% state match from the state.
Historically, how has the committee here allocated the funds between those three?
Well, what's interesting, Dan, is that the committee only can respond to requests for funding from the people in the community, and it took a while for us to make the community totally aware of the availability of these funds. And what's really been, to me, very, very interesting is that over the 13-year period, we have allocated almost a third to each category. A little bit less, about 30% to open space, because we do have various other organizations helping with open space. But we've been able to help out, for instance, with the acquisition of, in this year's, money towards the open space out in Mattocket. And then a number of years ago to the UMass Field Station when the Conservation Foundation acquired it. So in those larger categories, we've been able to help out. And the reason for that is that if there is, for instance, if there aren't any applications in any one category, we still have to allocate the dollar amount to that category, and it goes into reserves. So that money for open space, for instance, was always there. So this year, we had about 3 or 4 years of open space reserves that we were able to utilize in terms of coming up with the amount of money that was allocated towards the help of the open space out in Mattocket.
The FAA land?
Yes. Yeah.
How do any of those categories relate to recreation?
The open space includes the recreation category, and what you have to do in order to be able to to qualify for monies for recreation, you had to allocate 10% to the actual acquisition of open space, and then the way that the act was written, you then were allowed to, in fact, provide monies for recreation. And so
that's what I couldn't read when I tried to print it out.
And that gets us to the Nova Deer Farm properties, which are designed for recreation. And it's an interesting.
Who owns those properties?
Those properties were owned by the land bank, and the land bank has made them available to the town through Park and Rec to be able to be used for youth activities. And they had to go,
essentially athletic fields.
Yes, and they had to go back to the state because, in fact, the land bank charter in and of itself didn't allow them to be able to dispose of land in this manner. So we had to go back to the state to get special permission from the state in order to be able to have the land bank make it available to Park and Rec for the playing fields.
But those fields are under the management of the Parks and Recreation Commission.
That's correct, yes.
All right.
And therein lies where the issue has arisen that you're probably going to want to talk to me about, and I don't want to talk to you about.
That issue is the purchase of artificial turf.
That's correct.
For one of the fields.
Right.
That was to have been marked for, among other things, children's soccer.
Correct.
And ended up being marked for something else other than children's soccer.
That's correct.
And it's multiple use. It's not just children.
The point, there are two parts. The CPC was involved for two reasons. Number one, the first reason was that we had passed the bond issue to be able to get the funding to create and purchase the artificial turf fields. We had the other two fields, the natural turf fields, we had funding out of the normal procedure. But because of the fact of the need for that amount of money, well, at one point in time, we went and got a bond that got approved by the town voters. So the way that the CPC works is that the funds are allocated at town meeting, and that they're held by the CPC until the monies are to be expended. And our mandate from the Department of Revenues is that each year, on September 15th of each year, as chairman of the CPC, I have to certify to the Department of Revenue that the funds were actually expended in accordance with the approval given at town meeting. And so what we had set up from the very, very beginning was an approval procedure, and it's a separate one for town entities and for individual outside
private
entities.
Yeah.
But the procedure is very similar, and the fact is that with respect to outside entities, they have to expend the funds and then they get reimbursed, and they're reimbursed if the request is
somehow the town doesn't work that way.
But the town doesn't have the money to and doesn't have to expend it, but it needs to get approval before the monies can come out.
It needs to do the procurement.
And the town needs to do the procurement. It needs to come to us, the CPC, through a project manager to be able to say, okay, these funds are being spent in accordance with the approval that was given at town meeting. And what happened was that there was a bit of confusion with respect to town council's understanding of how these funds were going to be used, and so he suggested to DBW that they didn't have to come to the CPC for approval. That's being straightened out now, and a new set of guidelines are being set up.
Is part of the problem here that Park and Rec doesn't have any staff anymore?
Absolutely. It's the major source of the problem because of the fact that there isn't a go-to person in a online responsibility. Now, it doesn't mean it has to be somebody from Park and Rec. It could be somebody from DPW as the town wants to set it up. But what exacerbated the problem was the fact that it wasn't clear to anybody who was in charge of the responsibility of looking after things for Park and Rec, for Park and Rec, yes. And there was a period of time when Jimmy Manchester retired, and because Jimmy had been the contact.
When was this approved? When was this purchase approved by town meeting?
It was approved a couple of years ago.
Maybe 2012.
Yeah, when the bond was approved, and then the Park and Rec came back to us this year for the actual implementation of the funds.
How big? What was the cost of this project?
It's about $1 million.
Ooh.
And And what you also need to understand is the fact that this is a project that has been going on for about 6 or 7 years. We've been doing it in phases as money was available in terms of being able to do it. So we started out with the grass playing fields, first one, then a second one, and then in working together with Park and Rec, they determined that it was much better to have an artificial turf field because that could be used all around. And so that ended up leading us to do bond financing, and then once that was approved, to move forward with respect to actually installing the turf. And the problem came because there was a problem of communication, as best as I can see, between Park and Rec and DPW with respect to what the line should be on the playing field.
When was the artificial turf actually ordered? Do you know?
It was ordered back in the fall, and I had thought that the problem had gotten when the issue arose in January or February, and I thought at that point in time that it had been resolved because CPC is really not involved in that aspect of it, because that's a discussion between the Park and Rec and DPW. CPC is only involved because of the fact that they have to come back to us for funding with respect to paying for the turf.
So, is there any resolution, or are we just going to be stuck with the?
No, I think the resolution is going to be that what's happened is that there are sewn lines for adult lacrosse, and to my mind the solution is that because you can paint lines on the field, you're going to have to paint the lines on for the youth soccer. It means that there is an additional expense, and it would have been better if they had been the permanent lines, since the principal use of the fields is going to be for the youth sports. But the fact is that it's spilt milk. So so what we need to do is figure out a way to solve it, as opposed to having a situation where we continually yell at each other. So.
Right. Yeah, but it is too bad that something like this happens, because I guess there's no way, short of taking the turf up and basically redoing
the point
it.
is, I mean, you're talking $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 to do that, and that doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's an issue of non-communication or miscommunication, and I think it's simply because, in fact, Park and Rec didn't have a go-to person who was dedicated to them, because once Jimmy Manchester left, that was no longer.
Was he involved in the proposal originally?
Oh yes, I mean, Jimmy was involved with all of the aspects of and we've done a fair number of Park and Rec projects over the years through the CPC.
Now, how many projects have you done over the years? Period. Total.
I don't know the answer to that off the top.
I mean, it seems like you do 7 or 8 a year, 10 a year.
Well, more than that.
More than that?
Yeah.
Okay.
We probably have done
over 100.
Over 100 projects. Yeah.
And this is the first time you've had a
first issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in fact,
it's a pretty good record.
Over the years, we've only had one recommendation that we took to town meeting that was changed. And that, you might remember, that was the snow blowing machine over at
over
Mill Hill.
Dead Horse Valley.
Dead Horse Valley.
That's right.
Where the community need is expressed to us as a committee was sort of misread by the applicants. So,
well, anyway, I hope this works out. I hope it ends up being usable by the kids for what it was intended.
Well, it'll definitely be usable by the kids. It's just an issue of the fact that there's going to be more work involved in terms of having to paint the lines on, and there's some additional expense.
With people who would be better off in some respects painting lines on roads.
Or filling holes in roads.
KenBeaugrand, thank you for coming and explaining this to us. It helped me understand it, and I hope it helped the audience understand it.
Well, I hope so. I think that what I hope that doesn't get lost in here is the value that the CPC has brought to this community, because we have been able to really help out in many areas, help the town out in a lot of areas, and also help out other organizations to do stuff that they might not have been able to otherwise achieve.
I think it's a great mission. Thank you.
Thank you.